And we're live. Welcome to another episode of Moped Outlaws. And today we are blessed and privileged to have as our guest Tongo Eisen-Martin. Thank you so much for joining us. It's good to see you.
Man, good to see y'all.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just to give a little bit of reference, I saw your performance with Dr. Davis at College of Marin a few weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, man. Where I was, honored to rock with Cash Killing, the man, the myth, the legend among aliens.
yes,
Legend among aliens. I've never heard that before. That's awesome.
man, I am just a bit perplexed of how to dive in. One thing for me, your poetry, like I think I could take a lifetime to digest one poem.
Mm.
Um,
Well, I'm glad you feel that way as opposed to off put.
Yeah. You're definitely among a receptive group here for sure.
Right on, right
Yeah.
on. Well, I mean,
We
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was just going to say we've taken some time and energy to educate ourselves and do the work to decolonize our minds.
knock on
And
wood.
we are familiar with a lot of the things that inform white blindness around issues that are a big subject. And so we've actually can see the lifelong path to healing that we're on with open eyes now, as opposed to being completely like in the dark about that stuff.
Mm.
But I'll say to a footnote for that for me is I'm listening to the 1619 project now,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really beautifully built. And I always think like, okay, I'm kind of on top of this, and then realize, oh no, I'm not on top of it.
No, that's why I
well,
said lifelong.
and what also can kind of like accelerate that decolonization is praxis. What I found, um, kind of, with white people who have, who kind of flex um, the grooviest consciousness, they're usually involved in a lifelong process of of struggle, of collective struggle. And so, it's interesting. There's this in Buddhism, or in my rough understanding of this certain lineage of Buddhism, there are three vehicles in the path to enlightenment. And the first vehicle is known as the lesser vehicle, or called the Hinayana path. And in that section of your journey, what happens is you just learn how to detach yourself from hope and fear, from past and future. And then the next vehicle, known as the greater vehicle, the Mahayana, is where you basically take a vow that you will not enter enlightenment until all sentient beings are freed. And so the next leg of the journey is completely dedicated to collective liberation. And it's interesting, you can even get to the end of the first path. You can be completely divorced from fear and hope and these kind of attachments, but still not yet be at the finish line. That it requires an orientation towards your cultivation of working, for the benefit of others. That really gets you to the finish line. So I think, like, similarly, we can do a lot of reading, we can do a lot of study, We can watch our mouths. We can watch our thoughts. But ultimately, it's engaging in struggle, taking on the system, and taking on this ruling class. That is through that step that you're safest, or your evolution is assured. I mean, especially like these days. I mean, where I think there's kind of two features of United States oppression that really stand out against other empires in history, and that is concession, like surrender, and appropriation of its own of resistance to it. So there really is a tricky soup to swim in when you're still engaging reality from a like kind of an individualism. But fear not, you both will be okay.
We will be presented with opportunities and challenges to up level ourselves at every turn.
Man, especially as contradictions heighten, especially as this mode of production just, operates in permanent crisis. More and more, you're gonna be faced with a historical choice.
Before we move on, Greg, I'd like to ask Tongo if you would mind telling us what the third vehicle is.
It's the Vajrayana, which is where this is where you integrate into your mind, I guess, this like and this is probably the most difficult vehicle to explain, but it's basically where you completely come to terms with the illusory nature of reality, when you really get into the form and formlessness, that whole play, when when the unrealness becomes real to you in a very intimate way. That's my rough take. It's called the diamond vehicle, and it's indestructible.
Thank you for that, and not just when you're on mushrooms.
You gotta be careful, man. Mushrooms, man. Mushrooms might get you might get you a kind of like a taste, but ultimately, man, your ego's probably still running wild, man. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You still have an agenda. And I read something too that said, basically like, only through like, this kind of real disciplined practice do you really integrate these realizations. So you could actually have like a mega realization. Let's say the ego doesn't hitch a ride on one of these trips. You still, because it's not, it's just a break from regular scheduled machinery. It won't stick.
Right, non-abiding awakening.
Right.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to say a bit more about surrender? I didn't quite catch that earlier. You said the two elements of.
Yeah, so it's what there, and this is all really lifted from there's this groovy book called An Economic Interpretation of the Constitution by this cat named I think his name was Charles A. Beard. But he argues, well, he says, okay, this is the four ways that these so-called founding fathers were making a fortune. This is how a federal government ensured or kept safe these economic endeavors. And further, in the Constitutional Convention itself, there was another enemy. So there were two enemies. There was the rest of the world that, because the United States, they wanted to enter the global contest of empires. excuse me, there was the, there was that contest, and then there was the internal enemy, and what they described as unchecked democracy. That was that was kind of the word for keeping everybody in check. And so now when you look at kind of checks and balances, when you look at the dance between, different, from the local to the federal, state, like what you actually have is a system of pressure release valves. Because see, if we're all oppressed and the site or the seat of our oppression is that castle, it's easy for us to storm it.
Right.
But now, if you kind of diffuse power into these different branches and then these different departments and all of these bureaucracies, we don't know what building to storm, and we don't know whose head to cut off, right? And we always feel like we have someone we can talk to. So it's like, oh, you got a problem with your mayor, go to your governor. You got a problem with the governor, go to your congressperson. You got a problem with Congress, well, the president might be cool. You got a problem with the president, well, fear not, the Supreme Court might be, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's just like it's all this pressure really to get people to feel like, oh, things are socially evolving. But now, interestingly, I think we're entering an epoch where the iron fist is kind of reconsolidating. Like when you look at the moves of the Supreme Court, when you look at, kind of the effects of these decades of gerrymandering and all of these maneuverings. There was even, man, I forget, man. What was that cat's name? One of Trump's real architects, Steve Bannon.
Yeah, that's it.
So there's a clip of Steve Bannon saying that Trump might not have to go to the voters again, just because there was a scheme to manipulate. What is it? It was like there was a way to manipulate the state judiciary so that they could not interfere with if a member of the electoral college wanted to not go with the popular vote or something, they could just they would not be fettered.
Right. They would be unbound by the obligation to recognize the popular vote in their state, and they could vote according to their own will.
Right. Without like state judges being able to interfere as they are able to now. And it was actually, I think it was a Supreme Court case. And it was dangerous because we see that the Supreme Court is off the rails or truer to form. So
right.
You have now you kind of have these overtures of a more overt fascism that kind of like again puts us on a precipice that will require you to tie your evolution to collective action. I'm echoing a little bit. I don't know why.
Yeah, I'm guessing that's you, Greg.
No, I don't hear an echo.
Oh, all right.
Check. It's gone now.
Okay. Does anything readily come to mind where you say we could take action in this process? Like, does anything come to mind that is right action?
Well, that's man. If I had the equation, I would for sure make it kinetic, man. The kind of was tried and true is basically for the person who has decided they want to join a more humanizing process, to start with whatever speaks the most to you. So if like say if this this Handmaid's Tale of a move against abortion, speaks to take on that fight. If the kids in the cages, we see that Biden is basically gonna is basically using a cousin strategy to what Trump did as far as criminalizing asylum seekers. So take that on. If like the in San Francisco, the killing of Banco Brown, this extrajudicial killing of Black people, extrajudicial killing of trans people, take that on. So you just start with what speaks to you the most, but then what the constant synthesis and almost like resynthesis comes from, then a kind of just a inquiry into or just an education, self-directed or collectively directed, on just political economy. How does this society work? What would true transformation be? And then, so then you have this kind of theoretical framework that you're bouncing your local praxis off of. Like, okay, well, how we're going about this? How does this measure when looking at the kind of the necessary historical task? That's one route. That's if you don't want to just join a communist organization. I don't know. I don't know where these communist organizations are at with it right now. But you can always shortcut that.
One of the things I think is relevant to the conversation is that as an artist, your art is informed by this elevated level of conscious awareness. And that in the past, one of the roles of artists has been to shift the narrative, to create more awareness throughout. And that's been part of the nutritious aspect of the artistic output, is the way that it challenges norms and wakes people up and brings us into greater resonance together. So I want to ask you a question about poetry.
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay? Are you ready to shift into that?
Let us shift into.
So we had recently as a guest a man named Woodrow, who's actually known by his hip hop MC name MC Radioactive. And he brings this immense artistic quality to what he does. And he's relentless in his human love for people. And what I picked up in the work that you're doing is a similar form of love, but it's brought through this really powerful call to action, this really wake up to what's happening around you. And I'm wondering how you survive as a poet, and what are the economics of that for you?
Survive as a poet, man. By the skin of my teeth, man. Especially given the current cost of living, man, with an electric bill that's $500, with $200 easily for what should be $75 worth of groceries.
Right.
So it's I mean, I guess some actionable intel for those who would who would be poets. You basically piece it together. So I think the majority of income. Well, it depends. Some people play it different ways. I think it depends on. It depends on kind of what niche you want to stay loyal to. It's an interesting discipline in that, because there's no commercial viability to it. On the one hand, you have kind of a meritocracy. so that you can kind of like poem your way to a decent altitude. But then at the same time, because there's no balance of unchecked democracy, because because it's not like, oh, let the fans decide, because unfortunately, no, people will never heard of you. It does kind of like it's kind of strangled by gatekeepers. The good news though is that gatekeepers included pretty much everybody who is a part of like various poetry scenes, or just in it for the love of poetry, or just people who like language. It's not like, oh, lions and tigers and gangsters. You know what I mean? Facilitating this process is pretty much just sensitive people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you can kind of dance with that a few different ways. Some people, make a home in fellowships, in residencies, and are, kind of have a mind for selling themselves in that way, or have a mind for kind of applications, grants, these type of things. Some people kind of lean on academia, make kind of make a living, or barely make a living teaching. A lot, some poets, can make a decent amount of money performing, and just kind of piecing it together there, or some combination. And then there, there's a little bit of chump change to be made off of book sales themselves. I mean, it's kind of like there's not a lot of royalties paid on books. Not necessarily because these publishing companies are shady. It's just kind of like poetry publishing is kind of organized around the assumption actually that books are not going to sell well, and so it's basically like the contract is organized so that the publishing company gets their money back.
and can get their own money from
right. So they get their money back, and then I mean, especially like small presses, mid-sized presses that facilitate the majority of poetry, like they're always doing bad. Not bad, but like it's always by the skin of their teeth, and it's a labor of love by most of these publishers. So it's just it kind of is what it is. But if you get a big enough readership, or what books that are well traveled are books that end up being taught in colleges. If you if one of your books gets taught, then it can it'll sell a lot, and it will it'll boost your public presence up. But ultimately, man, I don't make. I wouldn't even call it, maybe a lower working class living, but what I get paid in though is time, because so I might not make or let's say I just a regular working class living, but I don't have to work 40 hours a week. I don't have to be producing for 40 hours a week for the same give back, So I go do a gig and it's 20 minutes on a microphone. So it's the time that really is what I get paid in, and why I'm able then to keep a pretty decent political praxis going, which is can also be selfish, because kind of like almost back to an earlier part in in the question, you know, there is kind of you know, a lot of the heavy lifting of craft takes place before you even pick up the pen. And it's how much a kind of like consciousness. So craft can only be so dynamic when consciousness is only but so dynamic, and consciousness can only be but so dynamic when it's when it not resting on real practice of what you believe in. So there's kind of like a groovy reciprocation that happens.
So this would be a good point to interject that if any of you listening to the podcast want to make a direct contribution, you can go to Tongo Eisen-Martin.bandcamp and listen to and purchase some spoken word from him directly. And so if you hear that, please go ahead and do that and support this artist. I'd also like to ask another question, if I may, Greg. Are you?
Yeah.
There's some movement that we see publicly publicized in Sacramento and also in San Francisco that is starting to look like actual reparations payments might happen. And I'm wondering how you see that. Is that another form of spiritual bypassing? Like, let's throw some money at this, and then, or do you think that there's some potentially some real value that could occur as a result of that? How do you see that?
Well, I see it a few ways. I mean, there's you know, I mean, again, with a $500 light bill, I wouldn't be mad at some breathing room. But you know, I think, and this is not actually an original assessment, and I forgot where this is plagiarized from, but someone was postulating that actually these reparations conversations is just a sub movement in the movement for universal basic income, and these kind of programs that will be rolled out to save the system from open revolt.
Right, that's what I was thinking. Is it UBI and reparations are another way to placate the masses?
I think so. I think so. I think it's an opiate, but I wouldn't. I think it's an opiate, but it's not something. There are some opiates I would fight tooth and nail. This one is just kind of it's almost secondary. It feels like too much of. I mean, one, how like how long it will dance in the ether of kind of of political theater. We don't know. You know what I mean? Like, is this gonna be the tug of war that because that's the thing about this U.S. hegemony. It's like we really just sit back and are satiated by just watching the tug of war. We know, in practice, we're still gonna be basically living in a fascist reality. Like, we really watch, this Biden thing, right? And it's like, man, has anybody? I mean, we watched this Obama thing. Did anybody's life change? Did any oppressed people become free? No, right? But just to watch the theater makes us more comfortable going to work than the next day. So I can absolutely, especially an issue that would stir up a lot of white people. I could definitely see this just being a movie coming attraction, or the promise of the next Dr. Dre album. You know what I mean?
Well, that's one of the things that concerns me is that if it doesn't come with education about how to actually activate that kind of wealth in terms of creating generational wealth with it, it'll just get soaked up by the capitalist hierarchy again anyway. And that these people will go from, whatever level of payout it is. California's talking about $1 million per person, which is extremely low considering what the reparations are for, but that it would just get like lottery winners, they lose most of their windfall right away. And people who don't have a consciousness about how to actually invest and create, sustainable systems for themselves would just get caught up in the day-to-day consumption lifestyle, and that the capitalist system would soak up that revenue.
Right. And generational wealth itself is kind of like a myth. It's not like kind of as we see from this liquefied white middle class. Like, it's not like you don't just save, you don't piggy bank your way to the bourgeoisie, and it's also it's not like these like this ruling class it does not it does not enforce their wealth with a monopoly of violence, right? Does not require wars all over the world, does not require medical apartheid, does not require like extreme social violence, keeps their wealth and power and influence intact. So you just getting your hands on a couple dollars, like it's almost like money. It's money and violence that makes money or makes wealth. You know what I mean? Not just a little bit of savvy. I don't even know if we could call it consciousness. We could call it like maybe a little economic know-how, so that you don't lose that million. But if you have plans of ruling the world, you're gonna need an army. You know what I mean? That is the rule of empire.
Right. But do you think individuals, generally speaking, want to rule the world?
Well, that's if you look at these mass shootings, man, they just might, man. Like it is kind of it's almost like a zero sum, deification of yourself, I think especially as kind of stoked by this kind of like this really consolidated era of celebrity worship, I mean, the working class was more of a fan of itself. Even in entertainment in the past, you had like sitcoms about the cat who, literally, Alfred's son, or Al Bundy sells shoes.
Right, yeah.
The Simpsons.
What I was trying to
The
think
Simpsons, right? So it's just like all of these situations, that are just down to earth working class situations. And also, when you had like stars, they were like super great at what they did. It wasn't like people weren't just like famous for nothing yet, so it was like, yeah, there were some people that were kind of like on Mount Olympus, but not for nothing, they kind of deserve to be there. I mean, we know that like, there were these, disgusting machines taking advantage of it, but still like when you're just looking at what people identify with, and how entertainment like enforces that, and how education enforces that. And so now when you have like, it's just kind of like you either have a godhood or you are nothing. You know what I mean? You are nobody. There is this, I think it does stoke in people this thirst for some kind of at whatever the quickest route to absolute power is. And we see that that's like, that's a major part of this is one of the major pillars of keeping like a white supremacist population. you know, rest in peace, Mike Davis. You know, the sociologist who wrote Planet of Slums. He
I'm
passed away.
unfamiliar with him.
Oh, it's a beautiful man. Planet of Slums is a must read. Because he's basically like, okay, for the first time in human history, more people live in cities than in the countryside, and here are the ramifications. Um, and so he was a brilliant sociologist, and he wrote he I forget if it was an interview, but basically they were talking about Trumpism. And he was like, well, what you have to understand is that all times in the United States, like 1/3 of all white people are literally like card carrying members of the Ku Klux Klan. Like this is like white supremacy is a mass is a mass praxis, right?
Right.
It's not just like, oh, some people are really gung ho, and then the majority don't really care much either way. You have like a really enthusiastic, you have like people that like they are completely entranced by this praxis of white supremacy. And so this is how you keep them dialed in. Like, what is a lynching? It is a taste of godhood, you know, to be like, man, we just gonna take this cat's life. We might not, we didn't have anything yesterday. We might not have anything tomorrow, but for this split second, we are lords of the universe. We can take this human body and completely desecrate it and murder it. This is also how, you know, this is kind of like how a hyper militarized society works too.
Let me ask you this. Do you think there's a human element of that? Like we have our reptilian fight flight thing going on. So regardless of race, human beings, like kind of going back to your Buddhist thoughts at the beginning, is that part of our conscious evolution?
See, I wouldn't like metaphysicalize it to the point where it just dances in a vacuum and can apply itself to any part of the human journey, just because here you have like basically you have a couple genocides.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Before, during, after, you know, hoped for, you have aspirational genocidal people, you know. So it's like we can't take the specific material reality that consciousness here, or really, well, now consciousness in the entire world, as it's just been affected by imperialism everywhere. We can't take that out of the equation. Or put another way, like, yeah, I might be destructive when I'm agitated, but you know what I mean? Like giving someone the silent, there's a difference between like me getting agitated with and giving someone the silent treatment, and me getting agitated and killing somebody. You know what I mean?
Right. And then going into a system and being told you're okay. That was okay. You're free.
Right. And then right. Or man, that was beautiful. You know, like, man, did you see the man, there was what's that conference? CPEC or something, that conservative conference.
Yeah.
And they were cheering for Kyle Rittenhouse.
Yeah.
You know, the kid that killed the people
Right.
in one of the George Floyd uprising.
Yeah.
And they were like, Kyle. It's like, I mean, some dead people are still, regardless of how you feel about anything, like cheering someone's death is bizarre, man. You know, or I'll give you another example, man. So a white supremacist killed my cousin in St. Paul, Minnesota, a year and a half ago, and for parking behind his house. And I went to the trial. The murder trial was just when was it? It was like, what was that? March? Yeah, it was like sometime in March. And man, his family and supporters, They were so casual. They were so nonchalant. And I'm just confused. Like, it doesn't matter if you, and then what was, not hilarious, but, what was just uh, like, I don't even know what, I don't even, I can't even do it justice, but basically, so the narrative was that my cousin approached this guy with anger and violence, and so he killed him in self-defense, when a ring camera on a garage, there was a ring camera on a garage that captured the whole thing. And it showed my cousin coming out like, "Oh, so sorry, sir. I'm moving the car right now. Apologies." You know what I mean? Came up with a humility that you can't even fake, man. It wasn't even like a sarcastic or let me get this out the way. It was really like, "Oh, no, 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 my bad, my bad." Right? So even after this footage gets shown, they're still, So whether whether that was a kid that got killed or even a monster who got killed, death, an untimely death is an untimely death, and an untimely murder is this also should have an effect that, like, this cat got to walk around and be a murderer. Like, we should all have respect for the gravity of this situation. We should all be in this courtroom solemn and respectful. But these people were just like, so it's just like it's kind of like, it's mind-boggling what compounded white supremacy, compounded militarization has just done to the mass psyche, in general, to just give everybody just like this kind of like taste for murder of non-white people.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing you say. Like, part of my privilege as a white person is I can take a person of color's life and be heroized.
Really, man. And and it's that, it's accelerating now. Maybe there are a lot of cases like, because before they were saying like, well, we know that this extrajudicial killing by police of black people is nothing new, and it's not. But now it's being taped, and so now it's more public, and this instigates movements. But I think, man, I would be interested in, I think like what was just as important to murder was Ahmaud Arbery, right? Around that same time, right? Because now you seeing like my cousin, like, what was that kid, the flute player? Ralph something, he just got shot. He was trying to pick up his brothers, and
Right, right.
he went to like the avenue instead of terrace. Like, he went to the
Yes,
same street, but it was like avenue instead of terrace or something like
right,
that.
right.
And this dude shot him in the head,
Yeah, and
right?
right, and then went back to bed.
Now you have all these kind of so-called civilians that want to participate in this white supremacist violence, and think they can really get away with it.
Well, and they can. That's the unfortunate reality of the way the system's working right now, is that they are getting away with it.
Yeah, I'd be really interested in the numbers, man. Like, I think somebody should do that shit. Somebody should do that study.
Like, part of what I'm holding, and I'm kind of looking for opinions and guidance in this, because right when that young gentleman was going to pick up his brother and sister and was shot because he accidentally went to the right house, within that week, there was that young 6-year-old girl that ran into the neighbor's yard to get a basketball, and the gentleman shot her father and was shooting at her. And this gentleman was a gentleman of color. And of course, part of the narrative that I heard is, well, this is not a factor of white supremacy, like the young flute player gentleman. This is just happening socially?
Man, I would, again, I would love, I would love it to, I would love for zealous, home defense to magically exist, man, in a vacuum and be and just come down and apply itself to different individuals, man. But that's just not the social reality. And it's like, and that's also not the history. And so I would be careful, even when they look at, even when they try to hold up like, oh, the cops that stopped the one kid, beat the one kid to death in Memphis. What was his name?
I
There's so
don't
many
know.
cases I can't even keep
You're
track.
right, right. Well, there's sort of the answer to it right there.
So they were all black police officers, right? But
Mhm.
now surrogates of the white power structure are surrogates of the white power structure, regardless. And also, man, hegemony is hegemony. So it's like all that to say, like, as long as you have a white power structure, as long as you have this white ruling class, you are going to have this mass violence, right? And especially you're going to have this especially heinous, um, mass violence perpetuated against, like, like where people are just looking to kill somebody, because it's just like this cat who killed my cousin, like he came out palming a shank, right? With like a perfect assassin's tool, because it wasn't intimidating and it was easy to kind of like to hold in the hand, and you didn't even see it. It was like this big handle, like a good grippable handle, but like a sliver of a
Yeah, like
stabbing utensil. And so, and my cousin was even confused for a split second, like, because the dude would not let him get in his car, and he was like amping himself up. You can't be on my property. You can't be on my property. And then boom. I mean, it was like that. So, like, would that have happened to a white kid?
No.
no,
No.
no.
The young flutist name is Elijah McClain, I believe, based on my
Mm.
internet research that I did. And I would love it if you would please name your cousin.
AJ Stewart.
Yeah.
Yeah, AJ Stewart. The
Thank you.
dude was found guilty, but he was granted his defense lawyer is trying to argue that one of the jurors showed bias against white police officers based on a Facebook post on George Floyd, and therefore is biased against white people. so what was supposed to be a sentencing hearing on the 17th of this month is now going to be a hearing on whether this guy gets a new trial. I mean, it's ridiculous, man. I mean, this cat was really like dead to rights, man. I mean, the whole thing.
If this isn't a murder, we are, what is? Like, it's just from your description.
I was super when sitting in the courtroom seeing all this evidence. I was surprised this dude went to trial. Like, I was like, why didn't he try to get a deal to do? Because I could have sworn everybody sees all the evidence before the circus begins. So just like looking at it, man, I was just like, how did you look at this and thought, man? I mean, only through a white supremacist lens, because it's just like only if you feel like every black person, regardless of anything, is a threat Um,
I want to switch, if we can, and pivot here if we might.
mm-hmm.
There's a kind of implicit recognition of the need to burn down the system as we look at this through this frame. And the question that comes up for me in conversations like this is, what does it look like after we do that? What is it that we create to replace what we burn down? And I'm wondering if you have a vision for that.
Yeah, I mean, well, one, you don't necessarily have to burn things down as much as just transform what's already there. So, like, imagine if a Stanford education was free and open admissions. Imagine, proper health care being free. You can take the various kind of facets of reality and just transform the way they're organized and performed. And you have a wonderfully new society. If you take the exploitation, like if you lower if I can come out of the grocery store having paid $20 instead of $200, man, I'm walking on air, man. And I'm blanking on the documentary. Oh man, there's this documentary. I'm blanking on the name.
Just take a breath; it might come.
It never does.
Got it.
It always gets. It's like right there, but I will be here all.
Well, what's it about? What's the point?
Later. But the point of the documentary was that that actually the cost of food, the high price of food, comes down to distribution. It's not it's not with the growers, it's not with the farmers. It's the food companies and the grocery stores. That is why by the time it gets to us, everything is ridiculously expensive. So it's like it's not even necessary for the productive process of food for us to spend an arm and a leg. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be, like a burning down. It can really just be a transformation of what's already there. But man, that's a part. This is also it's the psychological requirement, man, of capitalism to keep people under pressure. They can't let us breathe. They can't give us a little bit of a reprieve. It has to be constant exertion if you're gonna coerce a people really to work against their interests and to play along with a reality that is just completely suffocating them. You have to keep us desperate.
When people who want to change the system have great need to change the system, and the limits of their imagination are co-opted by the system in the expression of violence as the concept for the answer, it's still perpetuating itself. And so the idea is that hope arises out of there being some articulated new potential vision. And for myself, I'll just say that the repeal of Citizens United is an essential piece. It's just one piece, but it's also the delisting of corporate charters after 5 years, which was part of the original structural way it worked. You could have stock to get money together to launch your enterprise. And then after 5 years, that stock was no longer tradable and had to dissipate. So if we change those two things about our society, we would change the way money works at a really fundamental level, and we'd have a lot less top-down monopolistic control and more competition, and we could see the emergence of enterprise that rises from the lower class and the middle class, because those people work. They know how to create reality. So
that's interesting. So basically a corporation just evaporates after 5 years.
Their shares.
Oh, that's interesting.
And that was the original way it worked. You could only sell a stock in the United States and own a stock for that period of time. And then what you were left with was a percentage of the enterprise, meaning if you were a holder of the stock when the stock, you still owned the company, but it wasn't tradable anymore through certificates. So you destroy the market of certification and the profit center that becomes. And now it's all about owning the means, right? If you invest, you're part of it after 5 years. I'm part of a tomato farm, right? And I can still sell my interest, but I can't sell 10% of it today and try to short it tomorrow and play all of those economic games with that aspect of ownership, and that ownership becomes functional again.
But man, in these times, man, where there's so much sleight of hand in the kind of like the financialization of capital, man, I don't even care. But man, where does it even exist?
Well, that's the thing, is we need to articulate potential steps that we can take that make it worth breaking down the system to those points of view, to those things, and those solutions need to be articulable and specific and measurable enough that people can arise in hope of achievement of something, instead of being caught up in the language of violence as their only way of reparation.
I think that there's also something to be said for worker-owned cooperatives.
Yep.
And for, you know, worker-owned cooperatives. Like there's that what is them in the Mondragon in Spain. There's like in the, what are they, Bathis in
Oh,
Spain?
the Basque people.
Basque.
Yes.
So they have they have, there's this area where like everything is cooperatives, from running from like major industrial operations down to like the corner store. And you know, like if one business fails, they give you education and plug you into another operation, you know, and you can kind of like, you can really create a kind of an economy of scale, you know, that's all facilitated by cooperatives. There's something to be. In fact, there's actually like a pretty substantial and substantive cooperative movement that has been, you know, operating. You know, I became aware of it like 10, 15 years ago, and so I'm sure it runs even farther and deeper. But it's basically along the lines of what you're saying. You know, instead of thinking in terms of burning things down, let's think in terms of like recreation. And so it was an interesting kind. Almost felt like a reformation, pulling from, you know, everyone from, you know, so-called radicals to you know, venture capitalists who seen the light, you know what I mean, to you know, cats with, you know, serious know-how of whatever their craft is. There was a, you know, it's a movement that's still going on.
It feels like it's the role of artists to bring to the light of imagination the form of these new shapes and possibilities. Like, we need artists to articulate, or even, you know, just documentary filmmakers to go to Basque and tell those stories, so that people can get some kind of assimilatable sense of a forward motion, of a place to go, that gives them more than just the idea of perpetual slavery and entrapment and violent insurrection.
And Audre Lorde would agree with you, man. I just recently read in that book of hers, Sister Outsider, one of the essays in there. She basically says that, like, you know, to imagine liberation, is virtually impossible for someone who has been living in this kind of like in a captive society. So what the kind of like enter a poet to just give you a little bit of, kind of an embryonic imagining of what a new day can look like or what a new mind might look like interacting with reality in a more, in a more liberated way. Interestingly too, even in the distillation of the horrors of oppression as well enter the artist. Man, I was watching that. You ever watch? I forget, man. I'm always forgetting. Be a pattern here, but there
Yeah,
was.
me too. You're not alone.
There was there was some kind of like documentary on The Shining, right? Because there's all of these theories, all these conspiracy
Yes, yeah, I
theories,
do remember that.
like Kubrick was admitting that he was the part of faking the moon landing, like he was the one who shot the moon landing footage. But then there was another almost theory that wasn't actually much of a conspiracy. It was actually pretty interesting. Basically, he said, or maybe she said, that that basically The Shining is about colonization and all of the genocide that comes with it. But your mind would not be able to handle the billions of the billions of events of violence. And so here is an accessible distillation of this in this movie, and there are all these like kind of Easter eggs, especially concerning like mass murder of indigenous people all throughout the film. So there's the artist on both ends, right? And both on like, let me help you come to terms with what's going on, and let me help you come to terms with what's possible.
It just occurs to me that I think there's a lot of hope if we are able to bring this knowledge into the education of young children at a very young age. And throughout the educational process, it continues to be built upon. Like I just learned of the Tulsa massacre from watching that HBO show when they started it with
Lovecraft Country.
yeah. And I thought, oh, that's an amazing, powerful beginning to this story. And then I learned, oh, that was real.
Yeah, man. And I'm kind of man, I'm a testament to that, as I was taught early.
Well,
for as long as I can remember, there was this this history and analysis. And fear not, dear listeners, it did not give me any nightmares. So you can go ahead and expose your kids to the truth. You know what I mean? You know what gave me nightmares as a child?
I don't.
Lady Eloise in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, that puppet.
Oh, she was scary.
That puppet, man, used to chase me around, man. Chase me around relentlessly in my dreams, man.
That was, yeah.
So Tulsa, don't worry. The kids not gonna have nightmares anyway.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily the truth.
So Tongo, what's coming up for you? Where are you seeing your next level of artistic expression arising? What are you getting ready to create? Or
well, I have another book with City Lights, kind of yet to be determined release. And I'm also a new member of the Last Poets. So,
and how does that play out? How does the being in the Last Poets represent? opportunity?
I'm not sure, man. I think it's going to be kind of like a beautiful improvisation, a beautiful collective improvisation. But basically, the old guard of the last poets, or the first guard, the original guard, the main guard, the holy guard, decided that they didn't want the mantle to die with them. That they wanted to they wanted it to keep going. And so the next I was just announced to be in the next kind of incarnation of it.
The next poet.
Congratulations.
The next last poet.
Yeah, that's awesome. Congratulations.
Right on, right on.
Very cool. Is there a responsibility that you have as the poet laureate of San Francisco?
No, it's pretty relaxed. I mean, we're. I mean, you can't help but kind of brush up against institutions that usually don't engage poetry, and so, and for the most part, I'm a good sport about it. But nah, it's pretty relaxed.
Cool.
And maybe just due to kind of like the giants that came before, like what are you gonna ask Miracatani to do that she hasn't? You know what I mean? Like what were you gonna say to her? Or what were you gonna say to Diane DePrima? Like, if you wouldn't mind, you know what I mean? Like so I come on the shoulders of giants, man. So,
Well, say again the title of your next book, if you.
Oh, I didn't, man. I didn't.
Not titled, but it's coming on City Lights. Got it.
Yeah. But I have I have the two already. Like if people want to check them out, I have the two books with City Lights.
Someone's Dead Already is on Bootstrap.
Yeah.
Heaven is All Goodbyes, and then what's the other one?
Blood on the Fog.
Blood on the Fog.
Yeah, Blood on the Fog. And then like you mentioned, there's the record that's on Bandcamp.
Yeah, I go to the railroad tracks and follow them to the station of my enemies is a record that you can get at Tongo Eisen-Martin Bandcamp.com.
Yeah.
And I bought that this morning before our interview, and I'm looking forward to hearing it.
Oh, right on.
I think it's a good spot to wrap it up. I'm really grateful for your presence and for your brilliance and for your insight and taking the time to share with us all of those things. And one of the things that we like to have as part of what we cultivate is that this is a relationship, and that if you ever need anything or if you ever want to talk to us again, there's a reason to come back. Please reach out to us. If there's something we can do, connect with us. We would love to hear from you and continues to support. And after we end the broadcast, I have something I want to mention to you if you would stick around, but I don't want it to necessarily go on the air.
Can I say something in
Please?
Man, let us all take some time to get Mumia Abu Jamal back on our minds. I don't know if people have been following, but even more evidence came up really that should exonerate him, but at the very least grant him a new trial. And this federal judge just denied him a new evidentiary hearing, even though in these boxes, bro, there's even the evidence of witnesses being bribed. Like they have a witness saying like, "Where's my money?" to the prosecution, Well, I mean, we got, you got judges saying like, I'm going to help them fry this N word, So it's just like, man, it's ridiculous. And he was just denied this evidentiary hearing. So, and I think part of the reason why they're able to continue this, continue,
Charade of justice.
right, is because he has moved out of the mass imagination in a way that, like 20, 30 years ago, it was a lot stronger. So I just hope that everybody, like let's lift his name back up. If there are some organizing efforts going on, tap in with those. See if there is, see what's going on. Invent some efforts yourself, letter writing, whatever. But like we really can't let him die in prison.
Yeah, and if anyone is not familiar with the struggle of Mumia Abu-Jamal, you can find out quite a bit by going to the Pacifica Radio Archives or kpfa.org archives. He had a show on public radio for a long time, as well as there's a lot of information there about the tragic events of his incarceration and the miscarriage of judgment or justice that is part of that story. So if you need to know more, you can go to those two sources.
Right on.
Tongo, thank you very, very much for sharing your presence with us.
Thank you. I'm glad we ran in.
Yeah, well, I'm grateful you were open to it, man. Thank you.
Right on.
Phew. Ah.